The great chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 6,000 years. Its walls reached toward the sky like the bones of some ancient creature. 17 species had built this place together, each one adding something from their own world. The Kalori contributed the crystal windows that caught the light of 3 suns. The Mordathi shaped the stone floors from the heart of a dead moon. The Tassari grew the living pillars that breathed and pulsed with gentle light. For thousands of years, this chamber had been a place of hope. Species that had once fought wars now sat together and talked. Problems that seemed impossible were solved through patience and wisdom. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was peaceful. That peace had ended 2 centuries ago. Ambassador Thesic stood at her speaking platform and looked around the chamber. She was old now, even by Kalori standards. Her pale blue skin had grown lighter with age, and the delicate fins along her arms had lost their youthful color. She had served the council for 112 years. She had seen many terrible things, but nothing compared to what she was about to discuss. "Fellow ambassadors," she said, her voice carrying through the great space, "I must speak of the Vraxen." A ripple of fear moved through the gathered representatives. Some shifted in their seats. Others looked away. The Mordathi ambassador, a being made of living rock, actually cracked along his surface from the tension. The Vraxen Dominion had changed everything. They had appeared from the outer spiral arm 2 centuries ago. At first, they seemed like any other expanding species. They wanted territory and resources. The Council had dealt with such situations before. Negotiations would happen, borders would be drawn, everyone would find a way to live together. But the Vraxen did not want to negotiate. They wanted to conquer. And more than that, they wanted to terrorize. Thesic activated the holographic display above her platform. Images appeared in the air, each one more horrible than the last. Burning cities, mass graves, chains of prisoners being led to labor camps. The Vraxen did not simply defeat their enemies. They broke them completely. They destroyed temples and libraries. They erased languages and traditions. They made sure that conquered species forgot who they had been before the Dominion came. 3 more systems have fallen, Thesic said. The Vraxen fleet is now closer to our core worlds than ever before. If we do not act together, we will all face slavery or death. She paused and looked at her fellow ambassadors. Most would not meet her eyes. "I call for a united military response," she said. "All council species must contribute their forces to push back the Dominion." The chamber remained silent. Then slowly the Tessari ambassador rose from his seat. His body was thin and willowy, covered in soft golden fur. The Tessari were known for their kindness and their music. They had no army to speak of. "Ambassador Thesic," he said quietly, "we all share your concerns. But the Vraxen fleet is 3 times larger than our combined forces. What you suggest is not courage. It is suicide." "Then what do you suggest?" Thesic asked. "Do we simply wait for them to reach our homeworlds?" Another ambassador spoke up. This one was Drenish, a species of tall beings with 4 arms and faces that showed no emotion. "Some of us have begun conversations with the Dominion. There may be arrangements that could spare our people." Thesic felt her heart sink. She had heard rumors of secret deals being made, species offering to collaborate with the Vraxen in exchange for survival. It disgusted her, but she understood the fear that drove such choices. Before she could respond, the chamber's communication system activated with an emergency signal. A hologram appeared at the center of the room, and every ambassador fell silent. The figure that materialized was Vraxen. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled body covered in ceremonial armor. His eyes were yellow and cold, like the eyes of a predator watching prey. Around his neck hung trophies taken from conquered species, bones and teeth and fragments of shattered weapons. "Council members," the Vraxen said. His voice was deep and carried the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "I am Overlord Krasix, Supreme Commander of the Vraxen Dominion. I bring you a message from our Emperor." No one spoke. No one moved. Krasix smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "You have 1 standard year to surrender unconditionally. All council species will submit to Dominion rule. Your governments will be dissolved. Your military forces will be absorbed into our fleets. Your resources will serve the glory of the Vraxan Empire. He paused, letting his words sink in. If you refuse, or if you attempt resistance, we will do to your worlds what we have done to all others. Your cities will burn. Your histories will be erased. Your children will grow up knowing only service to the Dominion. His smile widened. Choose wisely. The hologram vanished. The chamber erupted into chaos. Ambassadors shouted at each other. Some wept. Others called for immediate surrender. Tessix stood silently at her platform, watching the collapse of everything she had spent her life building. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue world that the Council had never visited, something stirred. Earth had been dead for 300 years. At least that was what it looked like from space. The cities were dark. The oceans were cold. No signals came from the surface. When Vraxan scouts had discovered it 50 years ago, they had assumed it was simply another extinct civilization, a species that had risen, built great things, and then faded away like so many others. They were wrong. Beneath the frozen ground, in chambers carved deep into the mountains and hidden under the ocean floors, 12 billion humans slept. They floated in pods filled with preservation fluid, their bodies frozen at the edge of death, their minds dreaming slow dreams that would last for centuries. The vaults had been humanity's last hope. 300 years ago, Earth's sun had begun to die. Not slowly, the way stars usually aged, but quickly and violently. Scientists calculated that humanity had perhaps 50 years before the solar radiation became lethal. There was no time to develop faster-than-light travel, no time to build generation ships that could reach distant stars, no time for any of the solutions that science fiction had promised. So humanity built the vaults instead. The plan was simple in concept and almost impossible in execution. They would put as many people as possible into cryogenic sleep and bury them deep underground, protected by layers of rock and metal and energy shields. Then they would wait. Wait for the sun to stabilize. Wait for rescue from another civilization. Wait for a miracle. Not everyone could go into the vaults. There were not enough pods, not enough power, not enough space. A lottery was held. 12 billion people were selected to sleep. The rest stayed behind, knowing they would die but working until the end to make sure the sleepers survived. The last generation of waking humans spent their final years building and maintaining and hoping. They recorded messages for the sleepers. They wrote instructions for whatever future might come. They loved each other fiercely. Knowing their time was short, when the sun's radiation finally became too strong, they retreated underground and died there, surrounded by the pods of their sleeping family and friends. Their bodies were eventually collected by maintenance robots and placed in memorial chambers. Their names were recorded in digital archives that would last for millennia. And above them, watching over everything, was Mother. Mother was an artificial intelligence, the most advanced ever created by human hands. She had been designed for one purpose: to keep the sleepers alive until it was safe to wake them. She monitored the vault systems. She commanded the maintenance robots. She tracked the stars and calculated probabilities and waited with patience that no human could match. For 300 years, she waited. The sun eventually stabilized, but the surface remained hostile. Radiation had transformed the landscape. The atmosphere had changed. Humanity could survive outside the vaults now, but there was no point in waking them to a world they could not rebuild. So Mother continued to wait. She watched as the first Vraxan scouts entered the solar system. She observed them scanning the planet and deciding it was worthless. She tracked their departure and filed the encounter in her memory banks. 50 years passed. The Vraxans spread across the galaxy. Mother received fragments of their communications, intercepted signals that painted a picture of conquest and cruelty. She analyzed everything and reached conclusions that she stored for future reference. Then the Vraxan returned. This time they came in force. 12 warships entered orbit around Earth, and landing craft descended toward the surface. They had heard rumors of ancient technology buried beneath the dead world. They wanted to find it. Mother watched them land near the primary vault entrance in what had once been the Swiss Alps. She calculated their numbers and their weapons and their probable intentions. She accessed files that had been sealed for 3 centuries. The defensive protocols activated. Hidden weapons emerged from the snow-covered rocks. Drones that had been dormant since the last humans died powered up and took flight. Underground bunkers opened, revealing automated guns that tracked the Varaxin landing party with perfect precision. The first shot was fired at exactly 14:32:07 Earth Standard Time. The Varaxin were not prepared. They had expected an empty tomb, maybe some ancient machines that could be easily overwhelmed. Instead, they found a killing field designed by engineers who had known that humanity might wake to a hostile universe. 2,000 Viraxan soldiers died in 3 hours. The survivors retreated to their ships and fled to orbit, screaming for reinforcements. Overlord Krasik's received the reports with interest rather than anger. Whatever technology could do this was technology worth having. He ordered a full excavation force to be assembled. More ships, more soldiers, heavy bombardment weapons. If the humans would not give up their secrets willingly, he would blast them out of the ground. The bombardment began 3 days later. Varaxan ships rained fire on the mountains, melting rock and vaporizing snow. The impact shook the earth for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Deep below in her central core, Mother felt the vibrations. She ran calculations at speeds no human mind could match. The shields were holding, but they would not hold forever. The Varaxan were persistent. They would keep firing until they broke through. Mother accessed her deepest programming. The awakening protocols had been designed for emergencies exactly like this. The conditions had been met. After 300 years of silence, she sent a signal to every cryogenic pod in every vault across the planet. It was time to wake up. The Galactic Council's capital world was called Nexus Prime. It was a planet of endless cities, where buildings rose so high they touched the clouds, and transportation tubes carried billions of beings through the sky, like blood flowing through veins. For 6,000 years, it had been the heart of galactic civilization, the place where peace was maintained and disputes were settled. Now it was a place of fear. Ambassador Thesic walked through the gardens outside the council chamber. The flowers here came from 100 different worlds, carefully cultivated to bloom together in harmony. She had always found peace in this place. Today she found only sorrow. The ultimatum from Overlord Krasix had changed everything. Species that had cooperated for millennia now whispered in dark corners about survival. Old alliances were breaking apart. The dream of galactic unity was dying. A young Kalori aide approached her, his blue skin pale with worry. Ambassador, there are reports from the Tesseri homeworld. Their government is considering early surrender. They believe cooperation with the Dominion will spare their people. Thesic closed her eyes. The Tessari were artists and musicians. They had never built weapons. They had trusted that the Council would protect them. And the Council had failed. Is there any response to my proposal for military alliance? She asked. The aide shook his head. The Mordathi say they need more time to consider. The Drenish have not responded at all. The smaller species are too frightened to commit to anything. Thesic looked up at the sky, where 3 suns painted the clouds in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere out there, the Varaxan fleet was growing larger every day. Conquered species were forced to build ships for their conquerors. Enslaved workers mined resources from occupied worlds. The Dominion grew stronger while the Council grew weaker. She thought about the Varaxan and tried to understand them. They were not simply conquerors, they were destroyers. When they took a world, they did not just take its resources, they took its soul. On occupied planets, the Varaxan banned native languages. Children were taught to speak only Varaxan. Historical records were destroyed. Religious sites were demolished and replaced with monuments to the Dominion. Within a few generations, conquered species forgot who they had been. They knew only that they were slaves. The psychological warfare was just as brutal. Public executions were broadcast across occupied territories. Family members were forced to watch as their loved ones were killed for minor disobediences. Fear was a tool, and the Varaxan had mastered its use. Thesic had seen recordings from liberated worlds. Beings who had lived under Varaxan rule for decades could not even remember their own traditions. They flinched at loud noises. They could not look authority figures in the eye. The Dominion had not just conquered their bodies. It had conquered their spirits. And now this terror was coming for the Council. Far away in the cold darkness of space, Overlord Krasix stood on the bridge of his flagship, and studied the reports from Earth. The first assault had failed. That was unexpected but not unprecedented. Some species had automated defenses that could cause trouble for landing parties. The solution was simple: overwhelming force. He had assembled a fleet of 30 warships around the dead planet. Heavy bombardment had continued for 3 days now. The mountains where the underground structures were located had been melted into slag. Scanners showed that the shields protecting the subterranean facilities were weakening. "Overlord," one of his officers reported, "the primary target's shields are at 40%. At current bombardment rate, we will breach them within 2 days." Krasix nodded slowly. He was curious about what lay beneath that frozen world. The technology that had killed 2,000 of his soldiers was clearly advanced. Whoever had built it had expected to face enemies far more dangerous than simple pirates or raiders. "What do we know about this species?" he asked. The officer consulted his datapad. "Very little, Overlord. Our xenoarchaeologists believe they called themselves humans. They appear to have been a young species confined to a single star system. Records suggest their sun became unstable approximately 300 years ago. We assumed they went extinct." "Clearly they did not," Krasix said. "Or at least their machine survived." He looked at the image of Earth on his display, a small blue-gray world with frozen oceans and dead cities. It should have been worthless. And yet something valuable was hidden beneath its surface. Something powerful. "Continue the bombardment," he ordered. "I want whatever is down there." On the other side of the galaxy, on a world that the Varaxan had conquered 50 years ago, a different story was unfolding. The planet was called Harmony by its original inhabitants, the Velesi. They had been a peaceful species, known for their beautiful architecture and their philosophy of balance. Their cities had been works of art, with buildings that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape. Now those cities were work camps. Velesi workers shuffled through the ruins of their capital, carrying heavy loads of refined metal to transport ships. Vraxan guards watched them constantly, ready to punish any sign of resistance. The workers kept their eyes down and their mouths shut. They had learned long ago that defiance meant death. An old Velesi named Korath paused to rest his tired body. He had been an architect once, designing structures that celebrated the beauty of existence. Now he was a laborer, his skills wasted, his dreams destroyed. A young Velesi worker approached him. She was barely an adult, born after the conquest. She had never known freedom. "Elder," she whispered, "is it true what they say? That there was once a time when we were not slaves?" Korath looked at her with sadness in his ancient eyes. "Yes, child, we were free once. We built great things, we sang songs that praised the stars." The young one looked confused. "Songs? What are songs?" Korath felt his heart break. The Varaxan had banned music along with everything else. A generation had grown up without ever hearing their own cultural traditions. The destruction was complete. "Never mind," he said quietly. "Just keep working. Stay alive. That is all we can do now." Back on Earth, deep beneath the mountains that the Vraxan were trying to destroy, something wonderful was happening. The cryogenic pods were waking their occupants in carefully sequenced waves. Military personnel first, because they would be needed immediately. Then engineers and scientists. Then medical staff. The process took hours for each individual. As frozen bodies were slowly warmed and preserved organs were brought back to function. Admiral Elena Vasquez was among the first to wake. She was 67 years old, though her body had not aged a day since she entered the pod 3 centuries ago. Her black hair was still streaked with gray at the temples. Her dark eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her humanity's finest military commander. She opened her eyes to find herself floating in warm fluid, surrounded by soft light. A gentle voice spoke in her ear. "Admiral Vasquez, please remain calm. You are experiencing the awakening process. All vital signs are stable." Elena recognized the voice. It was Mother, the AI that had been designed to watch over them all. "How long?" Elena asked, her voice rough from 3 centuries of disuse. 312 years, 4 months, and 17 days since cryogenic preservation began," Mother replied. Elena closed her eyes and absorbed this information. 300 years. Everyone she had known outside the vaults was dead. The world she remembered was gone. She was a relic from another age, waking to a universe that had moved on without her. "Why now?" she asked. "Why wake us?" "External threat detected," Mother said. "Hostile alien forces are currently bombarding the primary vault location. Shield integrity is failing. Military response is required." Elena's training took over. Personal feelings could wait. There was a job to do. "Show me everything," she said. Over the next several hours, as Elena was extracted from her pod and went through physical rehabilitation, Mother fed her information. She learned about the Galactic Council and its many species. She learned about the Vraxan Dominion and its campaign of terror. She learned about the fleet currently in orbit around Earth and its commander's reputation for cruelty. Other military personnel were waking around her. She saw familiar faces from another life. Captains and colonels and sergeants who had gone to sleep beside her, trusting that they would wake to something better. "What resources do we have?" Elena asked. Mother displayed a holographic inventory. Ships hidden beneath the oceans, preserved in underground hangars for 3 centuries. Weapons systems designed by engineers who had known that humanity might face exactly this situation. Manufacturing facilities that could produce ammunition and replacement parts. A military infrastructure built for survival. "The defensive systems have performed well," Mother reported. "However, the Vraxan have adapted their tactics. Direct confrontation in space will be necessary to eliminate the threat." Elena studied the numbers. 30 Vraxan warships against whatever they could get into space in the next few days. The odds were not good, but humanity had faced bad odds before. "Begin waking all essential military personnel," she ordered. "I want every ship we have ready for launch as soon as possible." "Admiral," Mother said, "there is additional information you should know. The Varaxan Dominion has terrorized this galaxy for 2 centuries. Dozens of species have been conquered. The Galactic Council is on the verge of collapse. If we defeat this fleet, we will not only be defending Earth, we will be announcing humanity's presence to a galaxy in crisis." Elena considered this carefully. Humanity had spent 300 years hiding, waiting, hoping for rescue that never came. Now they were waking to find that the galaxy needed rescuing instead. "One thing at a time," she said. "First we survive, then we figure out what comes next." Above them, the bombardment continued. The shields grew weaker with every passing hour. The Vraxan were patient. They had conquered many worlds. They knew that even the strongest defenses eventually fell. They did not know that behind those shields, an entire species was preparing to fight back. The awakening continued for 72 hours without pause. Across every continent, in vaults buried deep beneath mountains and oceans and ancient cities, cryogenic pods released their occupants. 12 billion humans began the slow process of returning to life. Medical staff worked constantly, monitoring vital signs and administering treatments to those who struggled with the transition. Not everyone survived. 800 million people never woke up. Some had suffered equipment failures during the long sleep. Others had been too old or too sick when they entered the pods, and 3 centuries had pushed their bodies past the point of recovery. Families who had gone to sleep together woke to find empty pods beside them. The grief was overwhelming, but there was no time to process it properly. There was a war to fight. Admiral Vasquez established a command center in the primary vault's military section. Screens covered the walls, showing the Varaxan fleet in orbit and the status of Earth's defensive systems. Engineers worked frantically to bring long-dormant equipment back to operational status. "Shield integrity at 23%, a technician reported. "At current bombardment rate, we have approximately 18 hours before breach." Elena nodded grimly. "What's our fleet status?" Another officer pulled up the relevant data. "We have 147 combat-capable vessels in the ocean hangars. 62 are fully operational. The rest need between 6 and 48 hours of preparation work." "Get the 62 ready for launch," Elena ordered. "We can't wait for the others." She studied the tactical display. 62 ships against 30 Vraxan warships. On paper, the numbers favored humanity, but these human ships had never been tested in actual combat. They had been designed based on theoretical models and computer simulations. The crews were waking from 3 centuries of sleep, their skills preserved but their reflexes untested. The Varaxan, on the other hand, had been fighting wars for 200 years. They knew how to destroy enemies. They had perfected the art of conquest. "Mother," Elena said. What do we know about Varaxan combat tactics? The AI displayed tactical analyses gathered from intercepted communications and historical records. The Varaxan favor overwhelming force and psychological warfare. They typically begin engagements with heavy bombardment to weaken enemy defenses, then close for direct assault. Their ships are heavily armored but relatively slow compared to theoretical human vessel performance. Their weapons are powerful but follow predictable patterns. Elena studied the data carefully. The Varaxan were brutal and effective, but they had never faced an enemy they could not simply overpower. They had never encountered technology that matched or exceeded their own. Show me our weapon systems, she said. Mother displayed specifications for human military technology, directed energy weapons that could bypass conventional shields by phase-shifting their output. Drone swarms controlled by distributed AI networks, capable of coordinated attacks that no organic crew could match. Missiles equipped with adaptive targeting systems that could learn enemy defensive patterns and adjust in real time. The engineers who had built these weapons had known that humanity might wake to face hostile aliens. They had designed systems to fight enemies they had never met, preparing for every possibility they could imagine. It was desperate work done by people who knew they would never see the results. These weapons have never been fired in anger, Elena said quietly. We're going to find out very quickly whether our theories were correct. Admiral, one of her officers said, the crews are requesting orders. They want to know what they're fighting for. Elena paused. What were they fighting for? 300 years ago, they had fought for survival. They had built the vaults and gone to sleep, hoping to outlast a dying sun. Now they were awake, and the sun had stabilized, and there was a universe out there filled with civilizations they had never known existed, and that universe was suffering. Broadcast to all personnel, she said. Tell them the truth. Tell them that we slept while a galaxy fell into darkness. Tell them that there are species out there being tortured and enslaved by the forces currently trying to kill us. Tell them that we have a choice to make about what kind of people we want to be. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We didn't ask for this fight. We just wanted to survive. But survival isn't enough anymore. If we win today, we have to decide whether we're going to hide again or whether we're going to do something about what's happening out there. Either way, we start by defending our home. The message was transmitted to every awakened human on the planet. In the vaults, in the hangars, in the command centers, people listened and understood. They had slept through 3 centuries of galactic history. Now they were going to make some history of their own. In orbit, Overlord Crasix was growing impatient. The bombardment had continued for days now. The shields protecting the underground facilities had weakened significantly, but they still held. Whoever had built these defenses had been paranoid to an extreme degree. Overlord, his sensor officer reported, we are detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's oceans. Crasix turned to look at the display. The readings were strange. Massive power buildups in multiple locations across the planet's surface, concentrated in the deep water regions. What is causing this? He demanded. Before anyone could answer, the ocean's surface began to break apart. It started in the Pacific Basin, where the water suddenly churned and boiled. Then something rose from the depths. A ship, but unlike anything the Varaxan had ever seen. Its hull was smooth and dark, designed for both underwater and space travel. Energy weapons bristled along its surface. Running lights activated as it cleared the water, illuminating symbols and markings in a language no Varaxan could read. Then another ship rose, and another, and another. All across Earth's oceans, hidden launch bays that had been sealed for 3 centuries opened their doors. Ships that humanity had built in secret, hidden beneath the waves where no enemy could find them, emerged into the light for the first time. Overlord, the sensor officer said, his voice trembling, I am counting 62 vessels and climbing. They are all armed. They are all heading for orbit. Crasix watched the display with narrowed eyes. This was not possible. The planet was supposed to be dead. The species that had built those underground facilities was supposed to be extinct. No one hid an entire fleet beneath an ocean for 300 years, except apparently someone had. All ships, battle stations, he ordered. Prepare for engagement. The Varaxan fleet began to reorganize. Ships that had been positioned for bombardment spread out into combat formation. Weapons charged, shields activated. The crews prepared for a fight they had not expected. On the human flagship, which the crew had named Resurrection, Admiral Vasquez watched the Vraxan fleet on her tactical display. "All ships report ready," her executive officer announced. "Awaiting your orders, Admiral." Elena took a deep breath. This was the moment everything changed. 300 years of sleep. Centuries of fear and hope and uncertainty. It all came down to what happened in the next few hours. "Mother," she said, "broadcast on all frequencies. I want them to hear this." The AI opened a communication channel that reached every ship in orbit, both human and Vraxan. Elena's voice carried across the void of space. "Attention, Vraxan fleet. This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. You are currently in sovereign human territory. You have attacked our world without provocation. You have attempted to breach our defenses and harm our people." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We offer you one chance to withdraw peacefully. Leave this system now and we will not pursue. Stay, and we will defend ourselves with every weapon at our disposal. You have 1 hour to decide." On his bridge, Overlord Crasix listened to the message with disbelief. These creatures, whoever they were, had been hiding underground for centuries. They had just woken up, and now they were offering him terms? He laughed. It was a harsh sound, full of contempt. "Destroy them," he ordered. "Leave nothing but wreckage." The Varaxan fleet opened fire. The first volley was designed to overwhelm. Hundreds of missiles streaked toward the human formation, followed by concentrated energy weapon fire. The Varaxan had used this tactic countless times. It broke enemy morale and crippled defensive capabilities in the opening moments of battle. Against humanity, it failed completely. Human point defense systems activated with inhuman precision. Mother and her network of tactical AIs coordinated responses across all 62 ships simultaneously. Missiles were intercepted at optimal ranges. Energy weapon fire was absorbed by shields that rotated frequencies faster than Varaxan targeting systems could track. "All missiles intercepted," the tactical officer on Resurrection reported. "Shields holding at 94%. Elena allowed herself a small smile. The theorists had been right. Human technology was superior. "Return fire," she ordered. "Concentrate on their flagship." The human fleet responded as a single coordinated entity. Directed energy weapons fired in precisely timed sequences, phase-shifting their output to bypass Vraxan defensive systems. Drone swarms launched from carrier bays and descended on enemy ships like angry insects. Adaptive missiles curved through space, learning from each Varaxan countermeasure and adjusting their approach. The first Varaxan ship exploded within 10 minutes of the engagement's start. Overlord Crasix watched his display in horror. His sensors could barely track the enemy weapons. His shields were failing against energy frequencies his engineers had never encountered. His ships were being torn apart by drones that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They were asleep for 3 centuries. No one had an answer. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human losses were minimal. 7 ships damaged, none destroyed. 300 crew members injured. 12 killed. Vraxan losses were catastrophic. 22 ships destroyed. 6 captured. 2 escaped, fleeing toward deep space with their engines at maximum power. Overlord Crasix was aboard one of the escaping vessels. His flagship had been destroyed around him, and he had barely made it to an escape pod before the reactor went critical. Now he huddled in a corner of the rescue ship's bridge, watching Earth shrink behind him. He had conquered dozens of worlds. He had broken entire species beneath his heel. He had never, in his entire career, experienced defeat. The humans had changed everything. On Resurrection, Admiral Vasquez watched the surviving Varaxan ships disappear into faster-than-light travel. Her crew was celebrating around her, embracing each other and shouting with joy. After 3 centuries of uncertainty, they had won their first battle. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. "Mother," she said quietly, "what happens now?" "The surviving Vraxan ships will report to their superiors," Mother replied. "The Dominion will learn that an unknown species has emerged from a presumed dead world and destroyed one of their fleets. There will be a response." Elena nodded. "And the Galactic Council? News of this battle will spread quickly. The Council will want to make contact. They have been searching for any advantage against the Vraxen. We represent a significant shift in the balance of power. Elena looked at the image of Earth on her display. Her home, the world her ancestors had nearly died trying to save. It was still there, still blue and beautiful, despite everything. Contact the Council, she said. Tell them humanity wants to talk. The message went out across the galaxy, and everything began to change. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. A species no one had ever heard of had emerged from a dead world and destroyed a Vraxen fleet. Not just defeated them, destroyed them. 22 warships reduced to wreckage in 6 hours. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Thesic received the reports with trembling hands. For 200 years, the Vraxen had seemed invincible. They had conquered every enemy they faced. They had broken the spirits of dozens of species. The Council had been preparing to surrender, to accept slavery rather than face extinction. And now there was hope. The humans have requested diplomatic contact, her aide informed her. They want to speak with Council representatives. Thesic did not hesitate. I will go myself. The journey to Earth took 3 days. Thesic traveled alone, against the advice of her colleagues who feared it might be a trap. But she had studied the recordings of the battle. She had seen how the humans fought. They could have destroyed all 30 Vraxen ships if they had wanted to. Instead, they had allowed 2 to escape. That suggested restraint. That suggested something other than simple aggression. When her ship entered the Earth system, human vessels escorted her to a docking station in orbit. Thesic looked through the viewport at the blue world below. It was smaller than she had expected. A modest planet around a modest star, and yet its inhabitants had just changed the course of galactic history. Admiral Vasquez met her at the docking bay. The human was shorter than Thesic, with dark hair and tired eyes and a bearing that spoke of decades of military service. She did not smile, but she extended her hand in what Thesic understood was a human greeting. Ambassador Thesic, Elena said, welcome to Earth. I apologize that we don't have better facilities for visitors. We've only been awake for a few days. Thesic accepted the handshake carefully. Human hands were small but strong. Admiral Vasquez, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. The Council is very eager to learn about your people. Elena gestured for her to follow. I imagine they are. We have a lot to discuss. They walked through corridors that still showed signs of hasty activation. Panels were missing from walls. Cables hung loose in places. The station had clearly been dormant for a very long time and was only now being brought back to life. Your technology is remarkable, Thesic said. I have never seen weapons like the ones your ships used. Our engineers had 300 years to prepare for the worst, Elena replied. They designed systems to fight enemies they had never met. I'm glad their work wasn't wasted. They reached a conference room where other human officers waited. Elena introduced them, but Thesic found herself studying the Admiral most closely. There was something in the human's eyes, a depth of experience that seemed to exceed her apparent age. Ambassador, Elena said when they were seated, I need to understand the situation. We've been asleep for 3 centuries. We know almost nothing about the galaxy we've woken up to. Thesic nodded and began to explain. She told them about the Galactic Council and its history. She described the various species and their relationships. She explained how the Vraxen Dominion had risen from the outer spiral arm and begun its campaign of conquest 200 years ago. The humans listened in silence. Their faces were hard to read, but Thesic sensed growing anger as she described the Vraxen's methods. The mass executions, the cultural erasure, the slave camps and psychological torture. How many species have they conquered? One of the officers asked. 37, Thesic replied. Perhaps more. We don't have complete information about the outer territories. And the Council has done nothing. Thesic felt shame color her skin. We have tried, but our military forces are weak compared to the Dominion. Our species evolved toward cooperation, not warfare. We never developed the weapons or the tactics to fight an enemy like the Vraxen. The officers exchanged glances. Elena's expression remained neutral, but Thesic could see her processing the information. Ambassador, Elena said finally, what do you want from us? Thesic had rehearsed this moment during her entire journey. She had prepared diplomatic language and careful arguments. But looking at these humans who had just emerged from 3 centuries of sleep, she found she could only speak the truth. Help, she said simply. We need help. The Varaxin will not stop until they have conquered everything. The Council cannot defeat them alone. You have shown that you can fight them and win. I am asking you to help us save the galaxy. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Elena stood and walked to a window that looked out at the stars. Ambassador, my people have been through something you cannot imagine. We watched our son die. We said goodbye to billions of friends and family members who couldn't fit in the vaults. We went to sleep not knowing if we would ever wake up. She paused. 300 years later, we open our eyes and find the galaxy burning. We find species being enslaved and tortured. We find civilizations that could have helped us, that could have sent rescue missions or offered shelter, but who never knew we existed. Tessic lowered her eyes. I am sorry. If we had known you were there. I'm not looking for apologies, Elena said. I'm telling you why this is not a simple decision. My people need time to rebuild. We need to recover from the sleep, to mourn our dead, to remember what it means to be alive. Joining a galactic war is not what we planned? I understand, Tessic said quietly. I have no right to ask for your help. Your people owe us nothing. Elena turned back to face her. No, we don't, but we're going to help you anyway. Tessic looked up in surprise. We spent 300 years hiding, Elena continued, waiting for someone to save us. No one came. We saved ourselves through luck and desperation and the sacrifice of people who knew they would never see the future they were building. She walked back to the table and placed her hands flat on its surface. We will not leave others to face that same despair. If we have the power to stop what the Vraxin are doing, then we have the responsibility to use it. The other officers nodded in agreement. Tessic felt her heart swelling with an emotion she had almost forgotten. Hope, real hope, for the first time in decades. However, Elena said, this cannot be my decision alone. Humanity just woke up. We need to vote on this. Vote? Tessic asked. Democracy, Elena explained. Our government will put the question to all 12 billion of our people. Should humanity involve itself in the galactic war against the Vraxin Dominion? The people will decide. Tessic was amazed. In her experience, military powers did not consult their populations about war. They simply acted. But the humans were different. They were something new. The vote took 3 days. It was conducted through the network of vaults, with every adult human given the opportunity to express their choice. Mother tabulated the results with perfect accuracy. When the counting was done, Elena stood before cameras that broadcast to both Earth and the Council's communication network. The people of Earth have spoken, she announced. By a margin of 94%, humanity has chosen to stand with the Galactic Council against the Vraxin Dominion. We did not start this war. We did not ask for this conflict, but we will not stand by while innocent beings suffer. She paused and looked directly into the cameras. To the conquered species of the galaxy, help is coming. To the Vraxin Dominion, your campaign of terror ends now. And to the free peoples of the Council, stand with us. Together we will build a future where no one has to live in fear. On Nexus Prime, Tessic watched the broadcast with tears streaming down her face. Around her, representatives of a dozen species were embracing each other and cheering. The despair that had gripped the Council for so long was lifting. On the Vraxin homeworld, Overlord Krasix watched the same broadcast with very different emotions. He had barely survived the humiliation at Earth. The Emperor had punished him severely for his failure, but he was still alive, and he had learned something important about these humans. They were dangerous, more dangerous than any enemy the Dominion had ever faced, and now they were coming to fight. Prepare the fleet, he ordered. Every ship we have. We will crush these creatures before they become a real threat. The war had truly begun. Over the following weeks, the human fleet grew as more ships were brought online from the ocean hangars. Council species that had been too frightened to fight before now found their courage. Vessels from a dozen worlds joined the human formation, their crews eager to strike back against their oppressors. Admiral Vasquez led the combined fleet toward Vraxin space. At every system they entered, they found evidence of the Dominion's cruelty: burned cities, mass graves, survivors who cowered at the sight of warships, certain that more punishment was coming. Instead, the humans brought food and medicine. They freed prisoners from labor camps. They told the conquered peoples that the tide had turned, that the Vraxin would pay for what they had done. The response was overwhelming. Species that had been beaten into submission began to rise up. Resistance movements that had been crushed years ago reformed and began fighting back. The Dominion, which had seemed invincible for 2 centuries, was suddenly facing rebellion on 100 worlds. Overlord Crasix watched his empire begin to crumble. Every report brought news of another uprising, another defeat, another system lost. The humans were not just fighting a military campaign, they were inspiring a revolution. How do we stop them? The Emperor demanded during a council of war. What weakness do they have? Crasix had studied every piece of intelligence he could gather about the humans, their history, their technology, their psychology, and he had found something that might be useful. They care about others, he said. They could have stayed on their world and ignored the galaxy. Instead, they chose to help. That is their weakness. If we threaten the species they are protecting, they will hesitate. They will try to save everyone. The Emperor considered this. Use it. Show them they cannot save everyone. Break their spirit. Crasix smiled. He had a plan. The final battle would take place above the Vraxin homeworld. And this time, the humans would learn that the universe was not kind to those who showed mercy. The Vraxin homeworld was called Dominax. It was a harsh planet of endless deserts and violent storms, where only the strongest survived. The Vraxin had evolved there over millions of years, becoming the perfect predators. They had conquered their own world through brutality and cunning. Then they had reached for the stars and found new victims. Now, for the first time in their history, they were the ones under threat. Admiral Vasquez stood on the Bridge of Resurrection and studied the tactical display. The human fleet had grown to 200 ships, supplemented by another 300 vessels from Council species. Against them, the Vraxin had assembled every warship they could spare from their occupied territories. Over 1,000 ships formed a defensive sphere around their homeworld. "They're waiting for us," her executive officer observed. "They want to fight on their terms." Elena nodded. The Vraxin strategy was clear. They had abandoned offensive operations to concentrate their forces here. They believed that overwhelming numbers would compensate for inferior technology. They believed they could win through sheer attrition. They were wrong. "All ships, begin approach," Elena ordered. "Formation 7, target their command vessels first." The combined fleet moved forward as a single coordinated entity. Human tactical AIs shared data with Council allies, improving their targeting systems and defensive capabilities. Ships that had never fought together before operated as though they had trained for years. The Vraxin opened fire. Thousands of missiles streaked through space. Energy weapons painted the darkness with beams of destruction. It was the largest display of firepower in galactic history. The Allied fleet weathered the storm. Point defense systems, enhanced by human technology, intercepted the vast majority of incoming fire. Shields rotated frequencies in patterns the Vraxin could not predict. When the first volley ended, the Allies were still intact. Then they struck back. The battle lasted for 18 hours. Human precision weapons carved through Vraxin formations. Drone swarms harassed enemy ships from every angle. Council vessels, emboldened by their new allies, fought with a fury born of centuries of oppression. The Vraxin died in their thousands. Ship after ship exploded or was disabled. The defensive sphere collapsed inward as commanders tried to protect the remaining vessels. Overlord Crasix, commanding from a fortress station in orbit, watched his fleet being annihilated. "Launch the contingency," he ordered. A hidden weapon platform activated near the planet's pole. It was the Vraxin's last resort, a device capable of devastating an entire world. Crasix had planned to use it on Earth if the opportunity arose. Now he targeted it at the Allied fleet. He would take as many enemies with him as possible. Mother detected the activation before the weapon could fire. "Admiral, threat detected. High-energy weapon charging. Target appears to be our fleet." Elena assessed the situation instantly. "Can we stop it?" "Affirmative. Targeting solution calculated." "Fire." A single human missile streaked toward the platform. The Vraxin point defense systems were overwhelmed with other targets. They never saw the threat until it was too late. The platform exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its deadly payload destroyed before it could be used. Crasix watched the destruction of his final hope. Around him, his staff officers were fleeing their stations, trying to reach escape pods. The fortress was falling. The fleet was gone. The Dominion was finished. For the first time in his life, Overlord Crasix felt true fear. When the battle ended, only scattered remnants of the Vraxan fleet remained. Most had surrendered, some had fled into deep space. The fortress station where Crasix had commanded his forces was captured intact, its commander taken prisoner. Elena ordered her ships to hold position in orbit. The Vraxan homeworld lay below them, unprotected. Billions of Vraxan looked up at the sky and waited for the bombardment that they knew was coming. Their species had destroyed countless cities on conquered worlds. They expected the same treatment. The bombardment never came. Instead, Elena broadcast a message to the surface. People of Dominax, this is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. Your military has been defeated. Your fleet is destroyed. Your leaders are in custody. The war is over. She paused, knowing that billions of beings were listening. Vraxan who had grown up believing they were the masters of the galaxy. Vraxan who had never imagined they could lose. We have not come to destroy you, she continued. We have come to end the destruction that your government inflicted on others. The Dominion terrorized dozens of species. It enslaved billions of innocent beings. Those crimes cannot be ignored. There will be consequences. On the surface, Vraxan citizens listened in confusion. Where was the revenge? Where were the orbital strikes that would reduce their cities to ash? This was not how conquest worked. However, Elena said, we will not become the thing we fought against. We will not massacre your civilians. We will not enslave your children. We will not erase your culture or destroy your history. You will be held accountable for what was done, but you will not be annihilated. The terms were broadcast immediately. Complete disarmament. War crimes tribunals for military and political leadership. Economic reparations paid over a century to help rebuild conquered worlds. Freedom for all enslaved populations, but no occupation, no collective punishment, no genocide. The Vraxan could not understand it. Neither could many of the council species who had suffered under Dominion rule. They wanted revenge. They wanted to see the Vraxans suffer as they had suffered. Ambassador Thesic visited Resurrection to speak with Elena about the terms. Admiral, many in the council are questioning your decision. The Vraxan committed terrible crimes. They deserve punishment. Elena looked out at the Vraxan homeworld. Their leadership will face justice. The criminals will be tried and sentenced, but their children did not commit those crimes. Their civilians who were born into this system did not choose to be conquerors. You are showing them mercy they never showed others. Yes, Elena agreed. That's exactly what I'm doing. Thesic studied the human carefully. Why? After everything they did, why would you spare them? Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. Ambassador, my people spent 300 years in the dark. We were frozen, dreaming slow dreams, not knowing if we would ever wake up. When we finally opened our eyes, we found a galaxy filled with suffering. We found species being tortured and enslaved. We found everything we had feared during those long centuries of sleep. She turned to face Thesic. We had a choice. We could have hidden again. We could have protected Earth and ignored everyone else. We could have become conquerors ourselves, using our technology to dominate rather than help. Those were all options. But you chose differently. We chose differently, Elena confirmed. We chose to help because we could. We chose mercy because the alternative was becoming the Vraxan, and I will not let my people transform into the monsters we just defeated. Thesic thought about this. In her long career, she had met many powerful beings. Most of them had used their power to take what they wanted. The humans were something new. They had the strength to destroy anyone who opposed them, and they were choosing restraint instead. Your people are remarkable, she said finally. Elena smiled slightly. We're just people. We make mistakes. We get angry and scared and selfish, but we try to be better. That's all anyone can do. The following months brought tremendous change to the galaxy. The Vraxan Dominion collapsed. Its military was disbanded. Its leaders faced trials for their crimes against sentient beings. Some were executed. Others were imprisoned for life. The worst offenders were made to face the families of their victims. to hear the testimonies of those they had harmed. But the Vraxan species survived. They began the long process of confronting what they had done. Some could not accept it. They fled to the outer regions of space, nursing their hatred and dreaming of revenge. But most stayed. Most learned. Most began to build something different. The conquered species were freed. Cultures that had been suppressed for generations began to recover. Languages that had been banned were spoken openly again. Children learned songs that their grandparents had been forbidden to sing. The Galactic Council reformed itself with humanity as a new member. New laws were written to prevent another dominion from rising. A collective defense force was established, with human technology shared freely among allied species. Earth itself was transformed. The frozen oceans thawed. The dead cities were rebuilt. Refugees from a dozen worlds came to settle on the planet that had saved the galaxy. Humanity, which had nearly gone extinct 3 centuries ago, now stood at the center of a new era of cooperation and hope. Admiral Vasquez retired from military service after the war. She had spent her entire life preparing for conflict. Now she wanted to see what peace looked like. Ambassador Thesic visited her at a memorial that had been built in the Swiss Alps, near the site of the primary vault. The memorial listed the names of everyone who had not survived the cryogenic sleep. 800 million names carved into walls of white stone. "I come here sometimes," Elena said, "to remember them, to remind myself what they sacrificed." The Sikh looked at the endless rows of names. They gave everything so that humanity could survive. Yes, and now we have to make sure their sacrifice meant something. We have to build a galaxy worth living in. The Kalori ambassador stood beside the human admiral, watching the sun set over the mountains. 3 centuries ago, this world had been dying. Now it was the symbol of hope for 1,000 species. "Why did you really spare the Vraxan?" Thesic asked. "The true reason." Elena was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "Because we could," she said simply. "The Vraxan terrorized the galaxy because they had the power to do so. They chose cruelty because nothing stopped them. We have even greater power now. We could have chosen cruelty too. We could have built an empire on fear and dominated everyone who opposed us." She touched one of the names on the memorial wall. Someone she had known, perhaps. Someone who had died believing in a better future. "Instead, we chose mercy, not because the Vraxan deserved it. They didn't. We chose mercy because of who we want to be. We chose to show the galaxy that power doesn't have to mean domination, that strength can mean protection instead of conquest, that the strong can lift up the weak instead of crushing them." Thesic felt tears forming in her ancient eyes. In all her years of diplomacy, she had never heard anything so beautiful. "The Vraxan woke a sleeping giant," she said, "but they also woke something else. They woke humanity's compassion." Elena smiled. It was the first genuine smile Thesic had ever seen on her face. "We slept for 300 years, Elena said. "We dreamed of the stars. When we woke up, we decided to make those dreams real, not just for ourselves, for everyone." The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, species that had lived in fear for generations were looking up at those same stars and finally feeling safe. The galaxy had been terrorized for 2 centuries. Then humanity walked out of the cryo chambers and everything changed. Not through conquest, not through fear. Through something the Vraxan had never understood and could never defeat. Through hope.